get that recording. Cool. Okay. Before we get into it, I kind of wanted to just do like a brief rundown of like design and why I feel like it's kind of important, and then some of the thought processes that kind of go behind the scenes when you're creating publications or creating documents or doing any sort of form of design. And recently I've kind of been, even over the last couple of weeks, been super inspired by just creative people, and especially in the music and dance realm, and how creativity has a way of being able to communicate messages and themes and ideas in ways that language can't, and in ways that are otherwise like you won't be able to put into words. And there is something about creativity and creative outlets that lets you be able to speak with and communicate with a real like sense of purity and real sense of rawness and a real sense of precision with what you're trying to communicate. And design is similar to that, and is part of that umbrella as well, being a creative outlet. But I guess the thing about the job of design anyway is to kind of communicate a message or a theme or an idea as clearly and as precisely and as best as possible. Design's all about how we can best like get this message that we have, or get this content that we have, and how we can best present that in a way that speaks clearly, speaks precisely, and speaks directly to its audience in the best way possible, but also in a way that continues to engage and keep the person kind of engaged with that piece of artwork or with that book or with that whatever it is. And so today, obviously, we're just going to go through the basics of InDesign, but I also wanted to like just encourage you that when you are beginning to start to design things and begin to do things, continue to ask yourself questions as to like, why am I doing this? Why am I putting this text this way? Why am I using this shape, or how am I using this shape? What sort of colors am I bringing in, and what do those colors kind of make me feel? What do they communicate? And begin to create this kind of this piece that actually does communicate and say what you're trying to say in the best way possible. That's the goal that every designer takes when they're doing a piece of design work, is actually how can I formulate and grab all these different elements and all this different content and put it together in a way that is precise, defined, and clearly speaking the message that it's meant to. That cool?
Awesome.
Yeah, sweet.
Yeah.
And so the difference between design and like decoration, for example, is that you can create something and then begin to decorate it with shapes, with type, with whatever it is. But decoration is kind of like an afterthought and is a bit more haphazard and doesn't necessarily serve a purpose. Design is something that is precise, and every single aspect on that page kind of needs to serve a purpose if you want to best communicate. And so when it comes to creating a book or a publication, the same concepts and the same thoughts are present in that creation. Like obviously what the book is, the things written inside the book, the words, the pictures, all of that is the primary message and is the primary goal. Like the book is made not for the design, but it's made for what's written inside the book. But design has an awesome opportunity to promote that content and present it in a way that makes the content even better. Like a random example of that is, I don't know if you've seen the Justin Bieber videos, the dance videos on YouTube that have come out over the last couple of weeks or whatever. By itself, those songs were already really a great creative piece. But then when you add another element like dance to it, the message and the level of communication and amongst those songs gets brought to life even more, and impacts you and can impact you more strongly within that creative piece. And so design is a similar in that regard, is that hopefully we can build off already great content, but present it in a way that makes the content even more powerful and even more purposeful. Cool. And that's the thinking behind design. Is that's my main goal when I sit down at work to do something, is to go, okay, here's my client, here's the brief, here's the job, how can I best present their message, their life, their goal, their whatever it is? How can I best encapsulate what they're trying to do and say, and present it in a way that's going to engage their audience as clear and as best as possible? And so, yeah, cool.
That's awesome.
Now, if you all have InDesign and computers, we'll go through and we'll go. I'll show you how that kind of all works and functions. And so your screen might look like mine at the moment. What we're going to do, first things first, I basically use InDesign for everything. At work, obviously, we create like social media, we create billboards, we do posters, we do booklets, we do books, we do presentation documents, like just normal written documents, like everything. And I use kind of InDesign for literally all of those. I know some of you might be familiar and used to using things like Photoshop or Illustrator to create those things. But the cool thing about InDesign is that you can, and we'll explore it a bit later, is that you can actually bring in Photoshop files and Illustrator files and place them straight into a document in here. But yeah, so this is the tool that I use all the time. It's potentially a little bit scary looking at first, especially if you're used to Photoshop and Illustrator, but even more so if you're not used to any Adobe software. So hopefully by the end of today, you'll at least be a little bit more familiar with the interface and what kind of tools kind of do what. I don't necessarily have a booklet or an artwork that we're going to create together today, but more so just go through some of the features and functions of InDesign. So cool, let's get into it. So I'm going to open up InDesign like so, and either we can go File, New Document, or we can click on that Create New. And so that's going to bring up a panel like this. And now, so if I was to create, so this is obviously you need to know what you're creating and what the purpose is for. So if I'm creating a written document that's going to be printed, I'm going to jump into print, and I'm going to make sure that all my units here are done by millimeters or centimeters, something that is obviously like definitive in paper sizes and all that. If I was to say my goal was to create some social media tiles or some online digital ads or something like that, I'll jump into web and I'll make sure that my working space was all done in pixels. That's how computer screens in the digital space works, as opposed to print, which is in millimeters. And so go ahead and create whatever you want. If you're going to create something today, like something for Instagram or a digital tile, use pixels. Otherwise, if you're going to jump into try and say make a Word document or a presentation document or a let's just keep that chat up. Oh, kia ora, Tracy, how are you? And yeah, so if we're going print, which I'm going to do today, we're just going to jump into millimeters. And so we can chuck that into print as well. That doesn't really matter. If we're in millimeters here, I'm going to say like, if I'm going to work in an A4 document, which is the standard page size here in New Zealand, the width of that is 210 millimeters. The height of that is 297 millimeters. And so that's basic, the standard size for obviously paper and print in New Zealand. If I'm creating a booklet, I'm going to want to create a document where there's like 2 pages side by side, so I can kind of design with the idea that, say like a double page spread, for example, I want to be able to design so I can see the double page spread. And so if I'm doing a booklet, I'm going to go facing pages, and I'm going to keep that ticked. If I was to create just like a one-off poster that was say A2 or whatever, I'll chuck in the A2 dimensions, and I'll probably turn facing pages off because it's just a standalone page rather than a working booklet that opens and closes and have 2 pages next to each other. So I'm going to go ahead and keep that ticked. And then under here in columns, we don't necessarily need to worry about that right now, but we'll go over this soon. And in margins, probably same again, but you can probably change that to whatever. I'm going to just change that now to 8 millimeters all around. And what that means there is that is in our page, in our working document, we're just going to set some margins within the document that gives us a space to work within so that we don't bleed outside of the page. Obviously, if you want your artwork and your design to go right to the edge of the page, then you could put your margins to 0 or just work outside of the margins when you're working in the document. But I'm going to leave that at probably 8mm for now. And bleed and slug, this only really matters if you're doing a print piece. And so bleed is basically what it does is it adds a section to your document that runs outside of your initial size. And that just means that if you're having it, like say if you're printing a full page, an image that goes across the whole page, or a color that goes across the whole page, when you're printing, you want to make sure that you can print in a piece of paper that is slightly bigger than this is if you're professional printing, like a booklet. They print it out in a page slightly bigger than A4, and they cut it off, on it into the A4 dimensions. And that just means that so you can place the image outside of the artwork, and it will print that still. And so when they cut it, if they make a mistake and they cut it slightly, like a mil too short or whatever, there's still image there running across instead of it going to white. It's kind of hard to explain, and it probably doesn't make much sense to you now, but that's what that's for. So you don't really need to worry about the bleed if you're doing like a printed booklet or something like that. And I'll show you what that looks like soon in terms of how you can see the bleed within the document. So I'm happy with those settings for now. I'll just go ahead and create that. And that gives me this page here. So now if we see that red line there, that shows the bleed. That white page is the A4 dimensions, and that bleed is 3 mils extra on either side. And so that's where I might, if I had a color background, for example, I'd run it across the 3 mil border, so that when it prints, and if they cut it slightly off, there's still black remaining instead of going straight to the white paper. That purple line, this purple or magenta line here, that's our margin. And so that's 8 millimeters in from the edge of the document. And that's just a guide for me to say, hey, Joel, make sure you work within this space. Cool. And so that's what a page will look like. Now in here's where we can see all our pages. So this is one of the panels that becomes super handy later on, and when you're designing. So this here obviously shows us our pages. At the moment, we've just got one page. But if I was to come look down here, and you hover over that, it says create new page. And so I can go ahead and say if I was doing 10 page document booklet, I'll just go 12 page. Now you can see all my pages here. Obviously that there looks like a front cover, that looks like a back cover, and that looks like all the pages in between. And so that's your booklet makeup there. In here you've got your layers, and so if anyone's used to Photoshop, that obviously you work in layer by layer. Here it's slightly different. You can create layers here, but I can have lots of different things and shapes and text, for example, all within the one layer. And so when I'm creating a document, usually I might only have one layer, or sometimes I might have two, and I might name one image, and I might name the other like text. And basically that's just so it tidies up all my space. And say if I wanted to hover over and delete all my text, or select all my text without selecting background images, it just means I can lock the image layer and do that a bit easier. But for now, just work on one layer. It's probably simpler. This links panel here. So that's, I briefly mentioned before, in InDesign, you can place images, obviously, but you can also place Photoshop files, Illustrator files, and other working document files. You can even place other InDesign files within an InDesign file. It's like Inception. It's pretty classic. But so in your links panel, that's going to show you all the images. I'll quickly link something in. Let's go, just so you can see. Cool, let's just chuck that in there. And so now, obviously, I've got this image on this page, and it's going to show up in my links panel. And here you can get all the image information, but you don't really need to worry about that. Cool. Here's the stroke panel. That only comes into play if you're using rectangles that have a stroke on it and stuff. Swatches, so this is your color library. This is where you can come in and make new colors and control the colors that are within the document. So to make a new color, actually we'll go through that soon. Effects, things like this you probably don't necessarily need to worry about, but effects is where you can come in and there's different effects in here that kind of do different things to shape layers, into image layers that make things transparent, etc., etc.
Hey Joel.
Yes.
What workspace setting are you using? Because I've only got some.
Great question. So I should have mentioned that from the start. That's brilliant. I'm in advanced. So you jump in advanced as well. It's not too dissimilar from essentials. It just shows a few more options down here, which I kind of like to have instead of having to find them in here. So I'll jump into advanced.
So if I'm on advanced and I've still not got all of the options that you have, is that something you have to manually check? And then I might have actually added in my preferences. I might have added more stuff. So if I might just reset advanced. So yours might look like that. Is that better? Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, they're all just curious about how it works.
Yeah. So I just added things. So all of these under window, all of these things here. If you click on, say output attributes, for example, it will create a window like this that has that option. Those like whatever it's affecting. And you can just click and drag and bring them in there if you find it. So it's more easily accessible. So that's what I would have done. There have been a few things that I've added just through working.
Cool.
Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. No worries. Great question. And so now we'll quickly run over this toolbar. And so this is where you'll probably spend most of your time grabbing things from. So let's just jump into a page here. So like most Adobe software, you've got the selection tool, which is hotkey is V. So if you touch V, it will bring you back to this selection tool. That just is a tool that moves everything, text, image, shapes, whatever it is. You can click on something else, select it, and you can move and do all that. This direct selection tool here, this works slightly different. If you have a shape, for example, and I just wanted to move this corner here, I wanted to move that somewhere, but leave these points here at the same place. I would use the direct selection tool, which is hotkey A, and this tool lets you select a certain point like so and then move that around. Whereas if I was just on V, if I grab that, it just moves the whole shape. So this is a great quick way of if you create a shape and you need to distort it to make it a triangle, for example, you could just do something like that. And here, this one here is the page tool. So this is if you've created a page and you're like, oh man, actually I need to change the dimensions real quick. This, if you just touch on a page, it comes up and brings up this panel here, which allows you to change the size of this page real quick. So it has some inbuilt default ones. So we're working currently in A4, but if I wanted to make this page slightly smaller and width than the other page, you could do stuff like that. So there's that tool, but another way of doing that is you could go, if you needed to change the size of your page, is if you jump into File and just go into Document Setup. That brings up basically the kind of page that we had at the start, where you have your margins, your bleed and slug, your width and your height of the document, number of pages, all that sort of stuff comes in, and you can just adjust it from that way as well. But that's just a quick way of doing it. Gap tool, I never really use this, but it just shows you the spacing between like a shape or a text layer. And you can change things. I'll briefly show you soon. Actually, I'll just show you now. Why not? So if I grab the gap tool, it shows you the space, and you can kind of move that gap to where you want it, and it will edit the shapes that you've selected. So if I wanted to make that gap a precise number, whatever, you can use that. But like I said, today's the first time I've ever used that tool in my life. So there you go. We're all out here doing new things. This one here, I won't really touch on this either. Yeah. Basically, this is just like a content selector. It's kind of like your links, but you can drop and drag and put photos places just through using this. But once again, I've never used this, although it could have been helpful in some instances when you have lots of images and lots of stuff to control. This is the type tool. And so if I want to create a text box where I want to input text into, I can just grab that, click and drag, make the text box however big I want it to be. Say I want it to fill out the whole thing, the whole page. And now I can type whatever in here and it will show up. So let's just put type. For now, I'll just chuck in some like placeholder text. And so placeholder text is just like dummy text. So you can do that by going into type, scroll down, and down here it says fill with placeholder text. And so I'll just fill that box of placeholder text for now, just so that we have something to work with later on. Cool, that's that tool. This one here is the line tool. So that's what you can use to create like dividing lines between text boxes or shapes or whatever you would use in line form normally. That's how you create one in there. With this is where like the stroke panel can come into play. Obviously at the moment the line has if you can zoom in real quick. To zoom in I use Command plus and that zooms in. Otherwise you can grab this zoom tool here and do the same thing by moving your cursor. But a quicker way is Command plus, and to minus out, to zoom out, is Command minus, so next to it. So that's a quick way of doing that. But yeah, so with the stroke panel, we can come in here and change the caps on the stroke. We can come in here and change how thick it is. So we can make that bigger by changing the point size of the stroke. We can say if we had a rectangle, we can change where the stroke sits within the box, whether it's inside the line that we made, outside the line that we made. You can change it to some inbuilt options here, which is like creating dotted lines or dashed lines. So yeah, that's how you kind of begin to make, like if I was to create a line that said this part of the page is perforated, for example, and you can rip this off. Usually there's a line that's something like that implies either cut here or rip here. And so to create a line like that, you just use these things. So that's the line tool. In here, this is the pen tool. So if you're familiar with either Photoshop or Illustrator, you might be familiar, or After Effects or anything, you might be familiar with this. So this is where you come in and you can make your shapes, just whatever. Draw your little things. And again, obviously you can edit. So up here in this top bar panel, this implies the fill color. So the color inside the shape, and this here implies the stroke color, which is this line. Same thing here, this implies the fill color and this implies the stroke color. So if I wanted to give this shape a fill color, I could come in here and say go blue, and that will go blue like that. And so in here, we've got a pencil tool as well. And so that does a similar thing to the pen tool, except you just draw and you don't use anchor points like the other one. But same rules apply. You can put a fill, change the stroke, do all that sort of stuff. So super similar to Illustrator if you're familiar with that. Super similar kind of rules and customs to that. What differentiates InDesign quite a bit from Photoshop, for example, is that Photoshop usually works in pixels, whereas things like Illustrator and InDesign work in a vector-based shape thing. So that means that we're not limited to the size of the pixels. It's a complicated thing to kind of describe, but basically when you have a a layer, say in Photoshop, and you made it like this small, and then you wanted to make it real big, it would now look super pixelated. Whereas in InDesign and Illustrator, the amount of pixels kind of grow with the shape, or the amount of millimeters of the shape kind of grow with it, and you can never see like the pixelated stuff. Obviously, when you embed an image, then those rules kind of come into play. But we can touch briefly on that later. In here is a frame tool. So this is essentially, I make a shape and say I want the shape to be filled with an image. I can click on this shape and I can go File, Place. And so the quick key for that is Command D. So I'm just going to hit Command D, and that brings up a finder. And this is where you can kind of pick your photos that you want to bring in, or your videos, for example. Let's chuck that in there, why not? And so here now we've got this photo embedded inside that shape. And how InDesign, again, differs a little bit from Photoshop and Illustrator is that these shapes automatically work like a mask. So if I go to extend the shape, see the image doesn't grow, just the shape does. Whereas if I was to hold Shift and Command and now do this, the image grows with the shape. But this is super handy because now I can say if I needed the shape to stay the same size, say that size, but I can also just click on this circle here, and now we can change the shape and size of the actual image and make it fit within that frame better. So we'll leave that there for now. And so this layer here, this tool here under the frame one, this is your rectangle tool. And if I click and hold on that, you get your other shapes as well. And so if I was to say, wanted to create a background behind this page that was a color, I would click and drag from that top corner or from wherever basically, and make that fit the page. And here I want to say, I want no stroke layer, but I want the fill to kind of be, let's just go with that blue for now. And now if I want it on just this right-hand page and not running over the left-hand page, I'll just come in here and bring that to the center. And then I'll just make sure that that shape fits within our bleed. And now you got your background layer where you can begin to bring type and stuff over top of that shape layer. Although, see now I just brought this picture over here and the shape layer is in front of our image layer that I brought in over here. So to change that, if I click on that shape layer, right click, it brings up this here. And what I want here is arrange. I just want to bring that shape layer, since it's going to be a background, I just want to send it to the back. And now that'll make sure that all the other layers on this page are in front of our background layer. Cool. So that's the shape tool. Here's the cut tool where you can cut kind of shapes and stuff. I never really used that. The transform tool, which just means you can kind of, again, is another way of adapting shapes, but again, you don't really need to do that too much, use that tool too much. This here is a gradient. So if I wanted that shape to be a gradient, say like so, that's how you create that sort of effect. And this is a similar one there. The eyedropper tool. So say if I wanted this background to be the same color as the background of that image, I'm just going to jump into this eyedropper tool with the shape layer selected, grab that and eyedropper on that. And now we've got that background layer a similar color to that color in there. Cool. That's the basic tools here. Up here, a similar kind of little function. So here, if we select this shape layer and jump up here, this is like our shape control. So if I want to make, say that that rectangle, that blue rectangle, 50% of its size, and I want to do that real accurately without trying to go like this and try and just figure it out, I can jump into here and just type in 50%, and it's going to transform that shape into a perfect 50% of what it was. if I wanted to just make it the 50% height, but keep the width the same, I could just unlink that, and jump into here and go 50, and it will only change the width instead of the height, and vice versa. Here you've just got the position values of where the shape sits. You don't really need to worry about that too much. If I wanted to turn this rectangle on an angle, this is what this here does. I could jump in here and type in 180, and that's going to do a full 180 on me. We can chuck in, where is that? 90, so you can see it a bit more obvious. There you go. I rotated on a 90-degree angle. Cool. Up here, you've got these things here, which can be super helpful sometimes. If I've created a shape really quickly, and I just wanted to get that in the center of the page, and I don't want to muck around with like trying to get it perfect, like so, I could quickly go with that selected. If you have this, find that up here in your top bar, and that's called align to selection, and I can click and hold on that, and if I go align to page, that's now going to find the center of the page and align that shape with the page. So I'll click that, and now I want to find this guy here, which is align horizontal centers. So this is going to align the horizontal center of the page with the horizontal center of that shape. So if I click on that, that's automatically done it for me. And this is here, align vertical center. So this is going to align the vertical center of the page with the vertical center of my shape. So that's a quick way of just making sure that everything's centered if that's what you're needing to do. Cool. Now I want to look at how we can kind of change and transform our text, because I imagine most of you guys, if you're using InDesign, that's probably why you're using it, is to either create a Word document or something that is super text heavy or has text on it anyway. And that's InDesign's main kind of focus, is actually how to best create layouts combining text and imagery. You know, if you're just creating something that was photographic based, like all photo, like something like Photoshop probably is better and has more control in that regard. But if you're combining elements like obviously shapes, pictures, images, text, even videos, InDesign is probably a bit more of a useful tool than Photoshop or Illustrator. Cool. And so if I just double click on this text layer here, and now lets me jump in and edit it. And so if I just go click and drag from the bottom there and just highlight all that text, I can now change the typeface, the size, the leading, which is the space between the lines of text. I can change the tracking, which is the space between letters, and I can kern individual letters, which is the space between individual letters. Yeah, funny that. So to do that, I can either jump up into this left-hand corner here, and this is Minion Pro. So currently typeface is Minion Pro, but if I click on that down arrow, it now brings up all my fonts that I have on my computer that I can select from. And so say if I was just to jump into, I wanted to change that to Helvetica, I'd find my Helvetica there, and now it's just changed all that text to Helvetica. But obviously I would say, let's make that a bit bigger, so I can come up here and find the point size, chuck in, say I want it 30 point type, and chuck that in there, and it will make all of that text 30 point. And again, like if I wanted to change the space, say I was looking at that text, I'm like, oh, it's pretty, there's lots of space in between these lines, and it's making my text feel pretty light. I just want to jump in here and close that up a little bit. This is the leading value here, and we can change that up here just by either on the drop arrow, or we can just type in there, say I want it 34, and that just brings that type in closer, which makes it a little bit easier to read.
Joe, is there like a rule to those spacing for text, or do you just go by looks?
There are a few, there's a bit of, like, it's both and. There are some rules, but also like every creative aspect, rules are also meant to be broken when it's the right time to. So in here, there's already input values, and these values are based on like a modernist type grid that work on a 12-point system.
Yeah.
And so see if you see all these numbers, they're all basically multiplications or work within a 12, like a 12. There's a few that don't, like 11 obviously is a bit of an outlier. 10's an outlier. Anyway, my maths is bad, but there's probably one or two other outliers in there that don't work in a 12-point. But everything else works by 12, so 72, 60, 54 as well. You can chuck in there. So it's like, and that's so that what most typefaces, or some typefaces anyway, that are built in the same system have, if I go 30-point type, most of the time 36-point leading is a good ratio for like the clearest and most easiest to read. Like there's been science and stuff done all behind it, and basically that's because of there is a type ratio that kind of is like quite harmonic, and so that is like, I think it works on a 1 to, or like a 10 to 12 is basically the ratio. So if I was using 10-point type, 12-point leading is ideal most of the time. And so obviously if I want to make that 3 times as big, 30 to 36 is the same ratio, and has the same look and feel. It's just multiplied by 3. So there is a little bit of a rule around that if you want to stick to it. But sometimes, because of how like differing typefaces are, and how not everyone's built, and the type designers who have made the typefaces haven't built that with that in mind, lots of typefaces don't actually look good and they're best at that ratio. Sometimes 10 to 10 might actually work at best. Obviously not in Helvetica, it's quite a tall typeface, so that does need a bit more leading than some others. But something like, if I was to use Calibre, that has a really small X height, and so compared to, I'll just get them side by side, it's quite a small looking typeface.
Yeah.
And so that one looks a lot more, the lines look a lot more open than that does at the same ratio. And so for Calibre, I might have to use a 10 to 10 rule. And so it really depends on the typeface. But yes, there is a general rule that most of the time the leading is more or the same at minimum than the point size. This is because if you start to go smaller, like I'll do it in Helvetica, for example, if I do an 8 leading on a 10-point size, we start to get, this like real super tight in here, and some points there might even be a crossover between, like, if these are at the same place, obviously that Q and the I would be crossed over, and you want to avoid that at all costs. Also, if you're just looking at that visually, that text, if I chuck that into 10, like that text block there is a lot harder to read than that text block is there. And that's purely just because of the space in between the lines. And so in terms of communication of design and communication of content, it's actually really important to make sure that the text is as readable as possible. And so point size, tracking, and leading are all of the kind of tools that you need and things that you need to pay attention to when setting some type. That cool? Sweet.
Yeah, nice.
Yep. Cool. What else should we go over? So another handy thing about InDesign, and what is, again, differentiates it a bit more from Photoshop and Illustrator, is its ability to create like layouts and guides that kind of help you put all your, like, obviously there's going to be, if I'm creating a booklet, there's lots of elements to a page. There might be a few images, there might be a text block, there might be a heading, for example. And my goal is to kind of, let's just quickly do that. Let's make that bold. Like my goal of this is actually to make these work in a harmonious way that makes, gives space and time and attention to each of these elements as much as they deserve. So if my goal on this page was to highlight, say, this image here, and then so when the audience opens up this this page, I want them to instantly get attracted to this image, and then I want them to maybe see what this page is about and read some content, the content. Yep. And then maybe there's a few other accompanying images that I want to have that just to continue to help build the story of why this image is important or cool, or these images are helping to aid the story of this image, which is what these types and stuff is doing. So there is like a hierarchy to how things should work on a page. Like if there's a page that's set up and everything's at the same point size and everything demands the same amount of attention on the page, most readers will look at it and go, wow, this is way too much. There's way too much going on here, and I don't actually know where I'm looking or where to look. And so hierarchy is really important to take people and the reader and the audience on a journey of design is about showing them where to look first, then they should be automatically moved somewhere else after that, and then they should move somewhere else. So you're kind of guiding where their attention is going. And that's done on terms of giving each section its amount of screen time as it deserves. And so to help you do that and help format spaces and like elements in those spaces and places. Oh, who am I, Leo? My word. To go in here into layout and margins and columns, this brings up this little panel here. And if I go and jump in here and go, say 8, and just click off that, it brings up these columns here. And so it gives me 8 columns per page. And this is a great tool to help you kind of be able to organize all your elements in a way that's consistent throughout the page. And that helps for hierarchy purposes, but it also helps for, I guess, like harmony between the elements within a page, because they're all for, like, I'll make that 4 millimeters. Because now if I make this image this size, it's now going to be perfectly half of that image in my page, right? And so instead of like before, this image size here has no real relationship in terms of dimension and size with this image here. And so in terms of like relating in space and size, there's not much relation there. Whereas now if I've made this image that fits within our grid that is like pretty much half that image, there's now this like subconscious relationship between the two of them just through size. And so if I was to do the same like that, and make it like that, now we have like this consistency going on between all these 4 elements in terms of size and hierarchy. Like when you look at this page, you're instantly, because of the size, going to go here, then you're going to go here, you're going to go here and here. But at the same time, they're all different, but they also all relate because of the columns and how they work within the grid system. And this is same to be like, you use this grid system not just with image but with type also. I want to make sure that say for example my text box goes half the page, and so I'll jump in here and make that slightly bigger so it looks slightly nicer. And now not only do we have a relationship between this and this, but now we also have a relationship with our text to these images as well. You know, if I was real onto it, I might even start to do things like this, where I would align the text with the bottom of the image. And so automatically now I might go from this image, and subconsciously my mind picks up on this line between the image and the image and text layer. And so my mind will go here, it might read the heading, and now it might look at these images. And so this like kind of column system is a great way to kind of organize and utilize your elements. Is that kind of making sense to you, everyone? I hope so.
Yep.
But yes, yep. So whenever I create a design, I might spend a good 10 minutes in amongst here trying to come up with a good, figure out how many columns I want, but also play around with my margins. And I might even unlink these and make my bottom margins slightly bigger, for example. And that just means that if I was to say creating a booklet, sometimes it's best not to have equal margins. You know, it actually looks more attractive to kind of have my top margin slightly smaller than my bottom margin, because we're so used to subconsciously having, when we're reading a book, there's usually footnotes or a page number down here. And so we can also utilize that and create space for that within our publication as well. Oh, whoops. Cool. There's like, you can also create, if you're wanting to get more into that, you can create guides as well, which do a similar thing to columns, and you can create rows and you can create columns, and you begin to create like this. If I will check them up. So now I've got these blue lines. I'll just turn my original columns off so you can see them easily. Now I've got these blue lines that are kind of doing a similar thing, but also adding in these boxes. And that might be an even more advanced way to kind of say, I mean, I probably wouldn't use that dimension of image, but for example, I could organize the images to work on that kind of shape. And so now we've got not only the width that we're controlling the images by, but the height as well, because of these rows. So that's another way of utilizing margins and columns and grids to keep everything similar. And what do we want to do here? So there's another real helpful tip for especially publications. And this is probably the last thing I touch on, because I realize we're almost been going for an hour now, which is probably too long already. But there's a thing up here called master pages. So if you click on pages, you might see this as well in your document, a thing called a master page. And what this allows me to do is, if I was to create, say, I wanted on every page, I wanted there to be this rectangle, and say I wanted there to be something that say like my title of the document, I wanted that to be present on the bottom of every page, for example, like so. I could do this within the master pages. And now if I jump back into, by double clicking on these pages, now that is on every single, if I was clicking between these pages, obviously not that because I've worked on stuff, but on these documents now, that is on every single page. So if I wanted to say, I don't know, like if you were creating a book that has numbers on every single page, like numbers off the page, like most books do, we can do that in our master pages by jumping up in here and highlight our text there and jump into type, and we can go fill with special character. And if we jump down into markers, and if we chuck in their current page number, it's going to do that, and it's going to leave you with an A or a B or a C depending on what master page you're on. And so say if I was to jump into there and I want that to sit right aligned instead of left aligned like it is in the text box at the moment, I can go up to here and go click on that guy, align right, or in my I don't have the paragraph window open. Yeah, we'll just do it up there just for now for quick ease, and that'll right align itself. And now if I jump into here, my actual pages, now all these numbers are showing what page I'm on. It's automatically going to each number. And so if I wanted to say, again, if I wanted to make that type bigger and a different typeface, I can jump into here and edit it like normal text. So change it to like 20, and again put that to Helvetica. And that's again, I'm doing this on my master page, and I jump back into a normal page. Now that's updated and good to go. So that's a good way of, if you are doing like publications or whatever, or documents with lots of pages and you need a consistent element on every page, it's probably easier sometimes to do it within a master page and apply that master page to this page. So that can be super handy. And now for what you can do in Illustrator as well is place videos and export as interactive PDF. Sophie, this is more so for your benefit. So if I jump into File and I go Place, and I have a video that I want to play, and that plays when I export this out as a PDF, I can grab my video, and if I just go tick Show Import Options, just so I know how it's coming in. Actually, and then just click, and that should apply the image to the page. And now holding Shift and Command, I'm just going to grab this bottom hand corner and just drag that in, and that makes sure that it drags the whole image as well as the frame. And now we have a video embedded into here. What I need to do though before I export is, if I jump into Window and go, what is it? Media. Where's media? Maybe it's not in that. Output, no. There we go. Under Window, Interactive, and Media, now I can control how this video plays. And so, say if I want in my PDF for the thumbnail to show this guy, I can go up here. So poster, which means the thumbnail that it shows in the PDF. I can click on From Current Frame, find a frame that I like, and just refresh that, and now it should show that frame. What I want to do is, for it, when it exported as a PDF, I want it to play on page load. So when you hit that page, it automatically plays. So I want that option, so I'll click on that. And then now if I export this page, this video will be embedded into the PDF and will be able to play on a computer. Obviously videos and stuff inside a PDF isn't that effective if it's going to be printed. That kind of goes without saying. But that's how you kind of get around and do that. Again, super handy if you're creating a presentation document that's going around your work, or you're presenting work to a client that has a video within it. That's how you do that. Cool. What else is something handy in InDesign? Are there any questions or anything someone would like to know or learn? As I mean, there's probably lots I could talk about in terms of just setting type. You know, I could probably do a whole lesson on setting type and the rules and regulations that we should stick to, and the rules and regulations that we should and can break around that.
I wouldn't mind seeing what you have done with InDesign, so we can see what's possible.
Yeah, man. So I will open up. I'll open up one of my latest publications that I've done. And so that was for, I mean, some of you have probably seen it. It was for the Christchurch Arts Festival. And so the brief for this basically was to highlight and show off all the shows as best as possible to attract as big a crowd to these events as possible. But also to create brand awareness for Christchurch Arts Festival as a company and as a festival. So in this document, I've got a pretty complex grid system going on. This type works in relation to the grid system. It's better shown probably here. So for example, the top of my letters always sit at the top of that bar, and the very see the hanging sections of all the type that'll always line up with the bottom line. You can see that more obviously here and here. And so there's always 5 lines of that type sitting within this space. So it's a bit more of a complex way of setting up. So my whole grid is based on my type size. But that's just cool, man. That's just wild stuff that you guys don't need to worry about at the moment. It took me a while to even comprehend how to set all that stuff up. And so I have a few master pages working. This one has my numbers that you can't really see, but they're there, and you can't see them because they're white. Again, I've got that same information but in black, and I've got the same information in white again. So I've got a couple master pages set up. And so these sections here, they aren't actually on this specific page. They're coming from my master page. This type, however, is on that page. Also, you can see my margins. I've got quite a thick margin in the inside section here compared to my outside, even my bottom and my top. And that's because this is going to be a book. And so when you open a book, sometimes the spine or the inside sections of the pages kind of get lost within the crease and within the pages because of how they're glued or how they're bound. And so I've allowed lots of space for kind of my type to sit outside of that kind of bind and fold. If you're just doing like a digital document, obviously you don't need to worry about anything like that. Or even if you're doing a poster, that's a standalone sheet. Again, you wouldn't need to worry about that sort of stuff. But yeah, so at the moment we've got like obviously line tool to create some lines, type, some type stuff going on. Now we have like an image and how type can work on top of an image. This image here is actually a Photoshop layer. And what is awesome about InDesign is that I can select this image, jump into my links panel and say I needed to edit this image slightly. I could go right click on this image and I can go edit original. This will open that layer in Photoshop. I can make my changes. I can then save that document and it will auto update with inside this document. So that's super handy. Again, like figuring out ways to get people to get drawn to this, then they're probably going to get drawn to the title. They're going to read some information about what the show's about, and then here they can find out the where they can go and see this show. So things like that we're always thinking about, how hierarchy and where the eye is getting dragged to and what is the most important information on the page, and giving it the space to be that. So again, just like layouts of how type and image can work together on a crazy grid. Again, obviously wanting to highlight the beautiful imagery that we have, but then also inform the people of what the show is about. Again, lots of the same sort of stuff. In that page, we kind of had another document that slid inside of that page, so that's why there's nothing else going on there. But again, just that's kind of what a document looks like before it gets printed. All of this sorts of stuff. Just rinse and repeat lots.
Crazy, man.
That's not printed blue, by the way. That's just an overprint. So we printed this page, that section there of the multi-pattern, that actually we used a special ink that was like kind of see-through but glossy, and so that's why obviously you can't have set that ink as a thing on here. And so got to set up a special like swatch basically to tell the printer print this with the special ink. All sorts of complications. Yeah. But yeah, so that's like a document for say a publication. But if I was to do like, I'll open up, you know, if I was to do just like a social media post or something like that, you know, it would look, it's a lot more basic looking. Like for that, I haven't really used margins or anything. It's just, you know, type over background. Same again, like for these things, it's like I'm sure I've used columns and it's kind of working on a little grid, but it's super basic. And to be honest, I didn't really need to set up a grid to kind of do that sort of stuff. But for me, I like using columns and stuff because it just helps organize everything and gives everything this. What was that?
Column system, like, or like, how do you choose?
Well, yeah, there are, like, obviously if I use a I'll set up one here real quick. If I was to use a 12 column grid, it now gives me the option, like, it's all dependent on what you're making and how you're using everything, but like for now I could use something going across the 12 columns. I could use something going across half. I could use something going between the 9. With 12 columns, everything can be divisible by 3, by 4, by 2, and so you have lots of shapes and sizes that can actually work within the grid system. And so obviously, if I have a shape or type or images that goes across 4 columns, I can use this 12 column grid to create 3 columns as well, like so. I can use this 12 column grid to create 4 columns, like a 4 column kind of grid, like so. I could use a 12 column grid to essentially work as a 2 column grid as well by going like this. But the thing is that all of these shapes here are now uniform within and consistent because of the 12 column grid that they're using. They all relate in some aspect, you know, because they're essentially all working off this space and this space. Cool. That's like a super rushed thing. So no, there is no necessarily like rules. Like I set up the width of these gutters. This is what the space is called. Just as like just by eye, by how much I actually want my images to be apart or my type to be apart. And so there's not necessarily a relationship. It depends what sort of grid you're using. There doesn't need to be a relationship between this size and this size. But if I was to set my grid up like the other document I was showing you before based on type, then I should do a video on that actually. It's quite interesting. Then there is rule, like all of this space here and this space here, and even the number of columns is all based on my size of my type and the point size of my type. And so in that instance, there's a real big relationship between my grid and my type size, and even my image sizes, if that makes sense. Yeah, man. Is that cool? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So there is lots you can do and lots of elements to think about, but also it's all about having fun. And again, like with any creative expression, it's all about, you know, seeing what you can do and seeing how you can push the limits, how you can break the rules, and like just exploring and expressing yourself. But you know, if it is a document that it does need to serve a purpose, then you actually need to like figure out how you can best communicate the content of that. And part of that is making the design look as visually pleasing, giving all the elements the space they deserve, and making sure that there's a hierarchy for people to kind of, the readers and the viewers, to follow you along with. And those principles are the same throughout any kind of design work you're designing that does need to serve a purpose. Yeah. Yeah, cool.
It's like last question, right? It's like a designer, like what's something that people shouldn't do as when they're trying out InDesign? Or do you think that they should try everything?
I reckon just play, like if it's just like, especially with programs like this, I really value just like spending time playing around and getting like used to how everything works and what everything does without giving yourself rules and limitations to work with. I know as a creative sometimes, and for me, even me saying that is probably kind of like anti what I believe, because I do actually thrive off limitations, because it's part of that is actually like, that's part of the creative brief, is figuring out how to best like push the boundaries of those limitations sometimes. But in terms of learning the program, in terms of learning how to create basic layouts and stuff, So it probably is best just to get in there without, don't create guides, don't even create like rules, don't even create margins. Just play around and just go off your eye and begin to create like begin to train your eye, I guess, to see how things can work and do work and what looks good to you. Because actually there is, subconsciously you do have everyone has a creative eye. Everyone has a design eye because you're bombarded with design, like 2,000 times a day probably. And so subconsciously you've picked up what looks good, what is easy to read, what is attractive. You've picked up, subconsciously how you've been trained how to view things. That's how hierarchy works, right? We all have an understanding, and because of the context that we've all grown up in, and we've over time been trained to bigger, brighter things. We're usually going to pull our attention first rather than small, dull things. And so there are stuff. Everyone has a design eye within inside of them, and so explore that without limitations first. But then I don't know. Once you've got the rough layout of how InDesign works and how design can work, then begin to limit yourself and begin to figure out how you can do things with a more precise direction, with a better purpose, and figure out how to best use visual elements to kind of communicate the message that you're kind of trying to create. Yeah. Is that cool? Cool, man. Yeah, if you have any questions or anything that you want to learn or anything that you need help with in terms of InDesign, feel free to get in contact with me anytime, and I'm more than happy to run you through how to do stuff. Because I remember when I first opened InDesign, when I was studying design at ARA, I got freaked out because the interface was just like so many different things going on, and I don't know how to do anything. So, but over time, as you play around, you do pick up on that a lot easier, and it becomes a bit more natural. So, but at the same time, it's also helpful to ask questions and get someone that does know what they're doing to help you out. Yeah. Cool. All right. Any more questions before we go?
Thanks, Joel.
Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate you guys listening in and doing all that.
Thanks, G.
Cool to see people wanting to upskill in these kind of spaces. Super handy.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Thanks, Joel. Awesome.
No worries. I'm sure in the next few days Ian will probably look to do some more tutorials, and I'll probably do some more tutorials as well. So if you do have anything specific you'd like to learn, like maybe we do look over some type stuff.
Yeah, that'll be cool.
And maybe we do look at and how to set up a type grid.
Yeah.
But other than that, we're open to ideas. So yeah, appreciate you guys. Have a good rest of the day.